The University of Lincoln is proud to partner with the Purpose Coalition to support social mobility and greater levelling up for the people and places in our country. As a university of opportunity, we provide a platform for talented people to realise their ambitions and abilities. Creating a strong infrastructure for ambition and an environment for success is vital. Getting a good education is important, but if there are no graduate jobs for students to go to, they'll need to move away. Along with a stable and secure environment to grow up in, success is equally determined by access to transport, fast broadband, healthcare, and other cultural facilities. We need to create infrastructure for opportunity. The COVID pandemic has yet again highlighted the structural inequalities in our society and shown the need for levelling up even more. This is why the University of Lincoln has taken steps to develop the wider infrastructure in our communities. We work with our schools in our region to support their educational offerings and improve attainment. Specifically, we have established an academy trust in the south of Lincolnshire, offering the young people access to university facilities and expertise to enhance their learning, along with future prospects through our employer contacts in the region. We have worked in partnership with the local cooperative society to establish a science and innovation park for new high-tech businesses bringing inward investment into the county, creating new graduate jobs, over 100 in the last 2 years, and providing support for our graduates to spin out ideas into new businesses in the park. We believe levelling up is about creating a better environment for our future society, and we're committed to continue to level up our region so our graduates can have fulfilling employment and enhance the environment for future generations. The partnership with the Purpose Coalition is a vital part of this work, and it's a pleasure to work together to level up the infrastructure in our region.
Hello and welcome to the next in our seminar series on levelling up goals. I'm Ian Dale. I'm going to be chairing this event today. All of the previous seminars, webinars, call them what you will, they are available on the Levelling Up Goals website. Let me tell you what we're going to be talking about today. The title of this session is How to Level Up Infrastructure for Opportunity, and we're doing this in conjunction with the University of Lincoln. And let me just introduce our panel to you. Justine Green is former Education Secretary, and of course she is a key voice in the Levelling Up agenda. She created these social mobility goals. We also have with us Professor Mary Stewart, who's Vice Chancellor of the University of Lincoln, and also joining us is Susan Davey, who's Chief Executive of Pennon and South West Water. Justine, let's come to you first. Let's look at the whole issue of infrastructure and how that can be used to really help the levelling up agenda. What do you want to talk about in this session in particular?
Well, I think infrastructure opportunity matters because for many communities, they are physically more disconnected from perhaps where jobs are than others, particularly in rural areas. And I think both for Mary Stewart, who's the Vice Chancellor of the University of Lincoln, but also Susan Davey, who heads up Pennon Group and South West Water, these are both parts of the country that are very rural. So this issue of opportunity on the doorstep becomes much more challenging to deliver in those sorts of places. But I think secondly, we've got unprecedented investment in infrastructure. So the other part of this is really about the fact that there are some amazing careers in the sorts of businesses that are literally putting in place the infrastructure that Britain's going to be using for the next, not just decades, but maybe the next century. And I think we've already seen in examples of, for example, Crossrail, just how much that can drive the skills agenda, just how much that investment itself can drive access to opportunities. So if we can put these things together, extending opportunity into rural areas, but then also for the investment that's happening, making sure it really does extend into those communities where perhaps there's been less opportunity than before, then I think you can have a real benefit to it. I think the final point I'd make is that as we see this broader shift on both technology and what happens after COVID, but also in relation to the green economy and that whole range of new careers and new jobs, many of the infrastructure businesses we have in this country are the ones that are going to be putting in those sorts of platforms, whether it's hydrogen enabled power, whether it's off the Humber and some of those wind turbines. All of that will be delivered by infrastructure companies. So it's a really incredible time. And I think we do often think about infrastructure in terms of transport and travel, but actually the reality is it goes much beyond that when it comes to Goal 11, infrastructure for opportunity. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from both Mary from an education perspective, but also Susan from a business perspective about how we really bring this whole agenda together to drive levelling up.
I should have introduced you as former Transport Secretary as well, because obviously
that is also true.
That's quite important in this too. And I mean, just thinking back to your time in that job, obviously we all know about Crossrail, we know about HS2, we know about the big ticket initiatives, which inevitably cost a huge amount of money. But often you can get much more bang for your buck in terms of transport infrastructure and connectivity by very localized projects too. How important are they? And we shouldn't lose sight of those, should we?
Absolutely not. And whether it's bus services that connect a village to the local town, or indeed whether it's some of that regional level transport infrastructure that means that cities in a particular region, for example, Manchester, Sheffield, Leeds, can all start to operate a bit more collectively as an economy. Those levels of infrastructure investment can be small, they can be larger, but actually they're absolutely crucial for people. And I think we called this levelling up goal infrastructure for opportunity because it was about saying it's not just infrastructure for the sake of it, it has to be infrastructure with a real purpose, and that purpose has to be making sure that it unlocks people's chance to get opportunities, particularly if they don't have as many on the doorstep.
Mary, let's come to you, Vice Chancellor of the University of Lincoln. I've only been to Lincoln once, but I do remember it was a bugger to get to and it took an awfully long time. How important is transport connectivity to helping people in your area level up?
Thank you, Ian, and yes, thank you for reminding me of the hours that one spends just getting around Lincolnshire. So I'll give you one example. We have a campus which is about 45 miles from our main campus, and I often drive down to that campus, and 45 miles, it shouldn't take that long. It takes nearly 2 hours because the roads are all single file. Inevitably, because of the part of the world we're in, it's very rural and very agricultural. Inevitably, you get stuck behind at least one tractor. And because there is nowhere for the tractor to go, you are genuinely stuck and the cars back up. And there is no other way of traveling. There are no trains. The bus services are not that good. So you have to go by car, and it takes an age. We do now, and just let me put in a little plug for Lincoln. We do now have LNER trains, 5 a day between London and Lincoln, and that's remarkable. And actually, that's under 2 hours. So it isn't such a bugger to get to Lincoln as perhaps it used to be. But that has opened up the area to become a bit of commuter belt for for London. And of course, we were delighted and campaigned with our local MP in order to get those trains. Makes a huge difference. But the infrastructure it's been one of the major things that our Chamber of Commerce, of which obviously the university is a member, and all our local authorities have been very concerned, have been trying to push, because it is really quite poor in Lincolnshire. So that is a huge issue. And in some areas, for kids to get to school, you know, there is a bus that goes first thing in the morning, so they can get a bus to school, but there is no way they can get home. And so there has to be car sharing and things like that. And for some families, that's not really feasible. So there are huge challenges about actually just getting kids to and from school, never mind anything else in the region.
And I don't know if there's been any research done on this, but in terms of aspiration, in terms of kids being able to maybe move about, sort of, I mean, obviously, I guess you would prefer that a lot of the most intelligent, the most aspirational kids stayed in Lincoln. But if you compare Lincoln with maybe other similar sized towns and cities in the rest of the country, do you feel that there is a block to aspiration because people just aren't used to the kind of travel that people maybe in the southeast would be used to?
Well, I actually wouldn't want to say that people don't have aspiration. I think they do have aspiration. I mean, Lincoln is about the same size as Cambridge. And I think often people can't imagine a town. It is a city because it has a beautiful cathedral, but it's sort of like a town. They can't imagine a place that size, you know, being like Cambridge, but it is. And I think it's not that young people don't have aspiration, or indeed that their parents don't have aspiration. Of course, there's some, but I think it's that they can't quite imagine. They want to do better. All the parents that I speak to want their children to do better than they have in life, but they can't quite imagine what that might be. In our region, for example, about 90% of businesses are small organizations, which is the point Justine was making earlier, that you know, most of the organizations in rural places, you have very few large employers. And what does that mean? You have fewer companies that actually will have like graduate training programs, for example. And if you cannot imagine being able to go to an organization that would expect you to have a degree, then it's very difficult for you, even if you want to do better, to know how to do that.
And what about technology? Because I mean, that was a big issue at the last election, where the Labour Party had in their manifesto free broadband for all. Obviously, that they didn't succeed, so that hasn't happened. But in terms of how maybe areas like yours maybe are held back by the lack of fibre broadband or whatever, is that a big issue?
It's a huge issue. We are still in some parts of Lincolnshire. They're working on the equivalent of dial-up speeds, and that is a significant issue. There's also a digital poverty issue, where young people will have a phone, but they won't have access to anything else. Luckily, you know, the government did put some money aside for schools. We have an academy trust near that campus that I was telling you that takes us nearly 2 hours to drive to. And our schools did get some funding from the government during the pandemic to buy equipment for children. But the reality is, a lot of them, through the whole of the pandemic, have been trying to work off their phone. And if you can imagine trying to do your schoolwork just off your phone, this is not the best way to be able to study effectively.
So what would you like to see done to sort of bridge that digital divide?
Well, I think the first thing that we would need to do is actually fix the infrastructure. You know, the real issue with broadband rollout has been that final mile. So you have the organization BT that has led this, and we have seen a rollout of fiber broadband, but it has not moved that final mile into businesses or into people's homes. So that would be the first thing I think we would need to do. And then I think the next thing is to perhaps find ways, whether this would be companies sponsoring, and I'll talk a little bit more about the work that we do with companies and our academy chains in a bit. But they do sponsor some of the young people in our academies to be given equipment so that they actually have the facilities that they need.
It's almost impossible if you're a 12-year-old without a laptop or tablet. I mean, that has to hold you back. I mean, it's just common sense, isn't it?
It absolutely is. So one of the things that one of our secondary schools has done is they have a tablet a renting scheme, which is subsidized by a number of companies. And this is exactly the sort of thing Justine was talking about the infrastructure companies providing support to help with opportunity. So the kids can rent for £2 a month, which most families don't find too difficult to afford. And then they get the tablet at the end. It just goes straight to them. But that is hugely subsidized in terms of what it would cost the school otherwise.
Well, let's move on to Susan Davey. Obviously, infrastructure for a water company, I guess we all know what that means, but you listen to Justine talking, you listen to Mary talking there. In terms of infrastructure opportunity, what does that phrase mean from your point of view?
Yeah, thanks, Ian. I think probably a few points to make on that, I think. The first thing is, you know, Pennon, South West Water, a very large employer in the Southwest. And I think as a large employer, you really have a responsibility to think how you can help create that vibrant labour market and opportunities for individuals locally and across the region. And for us as an infrastructure company, obviously with our outreach to all areas of our region, that's possibly easier than other businesses to do so. So, you know, we have our treatment works, we have our networks, and we have depots that go throughout the regional area. So where possible, then it is able for us to kind of connect opportunities to local employment opportunities that are coming up. I think the question for me is around, you know, how do we connect people to those opportunities and make it accessible through better transport links? So just picking up on what Mary was saying, really, you know, we are very much able to give opportunities to individuals, whether that's through some of the work we do with our apprenticeship schemes or through our more structured programs that we have. But for us, it is about access and making sure that we can provide that structured work experience for individuals. You know, we were great advocates of the Kickstart scheme that came in more recently, where we wanted to bring in 50 individuals into the business to help with potential opportunities for them graduating onto our apprenticeship scheme, and that has gone really, really well. But for us, it's about giving access to individuals wherever they're positioned within the Southwest, and for those who can't drive and don't have vehicles, enabling to get to our work locations out in the field has been really important. And we're fortunate enough that we've been able to adapt people to those locations, but obviously understanding for other businesses, it's not quite as easy as that. So I think the other aspect, I think, for us in the Southwest, being a larger employer and having that outreach of the supply chain as well, is how can we encourage more businesses into the region outside of the bigger cities? So we've got initiatives in our area like the Great Southwest, Back Southwest campaign, which is really to help encourage businesses outside of the traditional areas coming into the Southwest. And for us, we're in infrastructure, so providing that infrastructure to allow that to happen. I mean, we're working with some international businesses at the moment who are looking to build their businesses in the Southwest, and that relies on us with our infrastructure in place to allow that to happen. And what we need are our individuals to come and join our organisation, and giving those opportunities to individuals in the region is really an important part of doing that. We know from some of the surveys that we've seen in our region, in the Southwest, many younger people, up to about 70% in Cornwall, feel that they have to move out of the county in order to find jobs. And we think we've got opportunities, and what we need to do is make sure that we've got the outreach and the access so that individuals can, come and join what we're trying to do with our infrastructure and make this a region for all.
And you must be one of the biggest employers in the Southwest, I imagine.
Yeah, that's right. And I think the work we've done, certainly we have a direct workforce of over 2,200 within our region, but greater than that, we have a very large supply chain, and majority of businesses we work with in our region are SMEs. And we probably have an outreach of around about 5,000-6,000 through our supply chain as well. So, very large outreach within our region, and really important that we can attract people into this sector, which is really providing the infrastructure for this region. We look after over a third of the nation's bathing beaches, and tourism plays a big part for this region. So being able to do that and through our supply chain get the opportunity for individuals to join us is what we're focused on.
How much is it in your mind, though, that you cover a region which is incredibly diverse? You've got one or two quite big cities, but you've got huge expanses of rural areas, coastal communities as well, which we know throughout the country tend to be quite poverty-stricken. I mean, we all think of seaside resorts as being rather lovely and picturesque, but we know that there are huge pockets of poverty in them, and particularly, I would say, in Cornwall. How do you gear your corporate social responsibility to communities like that? And I mean, thinking back to what Mary was saying there about sponsoring laptops and things for kids in those communities, where they can actually benefit from exactly the same things that their contemporaries in cities would benefit from.
Yeah, no, really good point, Ian. And I think you're absolutely right on the deprivation. It is much higher in Cornwall than in other areas. And it is something that, we're very much focused on doing. So I think, I come back to access and outreach. So what can we do to make sure that we're providing structured work experience for individuals in that region and attracting people into our sector? But I also think it's some of the work we do as an organisation with the community directly. So very recently we launched our community funds, and we put money into schemes that were coming directly from the community that they wanted some help with, whether that was help with educational tools and materials, or whether it was more community-based schemes. But it's something that we felt very strongly about, certainly coming out of the lockdown restrictions that we've had through the pandemic. It's important that we have that connection with our community. So more that we can do to connect through those community funds, community schemes, and making sure that we've got the outreach through schools and colleges, through mentoring, and the access through the structured work experience and apprenticeship schemes that we're giving, making sure that we are able to attract a diverse workforce into what we do is really important, because we are very much supporting the community that we serve, and therefore we want people from the community to help us to deliver that. So that's what we're really targeted on doing.
Justine, we've talked a lot about sort of micro issues so far in terms of infrastructure, but given that government, I think, has a huge role to play here, when government are awarding contracts for big infrastructure projects, or maybe even localized infrastructure projects, should there be new clauses in these contracts to encourage or to force big employers to actually look at the levelling up position in their areas and actually make a conscious effort to either employ people from different areas or procure goods and services from particular different areas rather than where they might be used to be getting services from?
I think that is the trend. And actually, you mentioned at the beginning of this that I was Secretary of State for Transport. And one of the things I did do there was launch the procurement for Crossrail. And in fact, I remember getting those Crossrail tunnelling machines going with the then Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, and we pushed this rather large plastic blue button that was on a plinth somewhere, and I was absolutely convinced it wasn't connected up to anything, but they claimed it would start the boring machines going. So I took them at their word. But what we did do with those procurement contracts was to have part of it in terms of what their skills contribution was going to be. So it was quite novel at the time. And actually what came out of that was a lot more focus from all of the bidders on how they were going to drive skills and, if you like, the local economies they were particularly going to be operating in. And one of the most tangible things that came out of that was the Crossrail Tunnelling Academy. And of course, a lot of those people have now graduated from that and obviously moving on to other projects like High Speed Rail. There's obviously the Thames Tideway project in London as well. So I think that Crossrail procurement did set the tone, if you like, for what's possible. I think the next stage to go on procurement, and I was delighted to see in the Queen's speech last week that there'll be a procurement bill, is for government to think more strategically about how procurement can drive levelling up. So if you look even just in Mary's sector of higher education, universities spend £11 billion a year just as a sector. If you can really bring a levelling up lens onto that spend and that procurement, and as Susan is saying, there can be more focus on what companies are doing, then I think you'll really start to create a race to the top. So what I hope we can start to see are a stronger articulation from businesses around what they're doing against the levelling up goals when they're tendering for these different government contracts. And I think the mantra really needs to be that every single pound that's spent by government should have the maximum levelling up impact. And I think when it comes to the civil service, every person that's being recruited, there should again be an aspiration of really getting that maximum levelling impact from the people who are being recruited to deliver public services. So we're at the beginning of journey. I don't think any country's really nailed procurement actually in relation to how it can have this more beneficial, wider societal impact, but it absolutely can. And I think part of this, which we may come on to talk about, is, okay, so that's the theory, how are companies delivering it? But I think once you've got this more structured approach on saying that's what we want, hopefully through the levelling up goals, then you'll start to enable much more innovation and best practice to be shared. Because at the moment, you've got lots of companies with lots of good ideas, but they don't necessarily get presented in a way that makes it easy to compare them like for like and to kind of see where the innovation is.
Mary, do you think part of the problem here is that we use words like infrastructure and procurement? They're not exactly very sexy words, are they? I mean, if I say to my listeners at 8 o'clock one evening, right, let's do a phone-in on infrastructure, you can just imagine people switching off. How do we make this subject exciting so that people can see the consequences of a failure to invest in infrastructure or failure to change our ways of procurement?
It's a really good question, and you're quite right. I can remember just when I moved into a more senior role, having to do the procurement committee, and I just, my heart sank. My heart absolutely sank. I thought, no, somebody hates me. They've given me this terrible job. But actually, I think what you need to do is to connect it to people's lives. And Ian, you will know that. You of all people will know how how to show people how these things relate to their day-to-day experience. And that's all that we are wanting. I'll give the example. At the moment, I have the privilege of chairing two of the Town Deal Fund boards. These are huge in our region. We, through the Town Deals, are bringing in nearly 150 million from government through the Town Deal initiative, which is very, very exciting. So places like, you mentioned the coast, Skegness, for example, Dear Skaggy, getting over 20 million for the town, Lincoln getting 19, Scunthorpe getting 21, and Maplethorpe, another coastal town, getting 23 million. So I chair both the Lincoln Town Deal Board and the Scunthorpe one. And, you know, this is all about infrastructure. It's bringing money into towns for local people to make decisions about how to improve their area. And so it's been run through local district councils, and those councils obviously have to communicate with their people and help the people who voted for them understand how this is going to have an impact on their lives. So we've been doing quite a lot of work on showing how, for example, taking a couple of old buildings that are derelict and turning them into places where new businesses will be starting up. One, how that will, you know, transform that part of the town and make it look better. And that if people are have somewhere to start up their building, their business, they'll come into the town, they'll spend in the town, and that will mean more growth for the town. It's explaining these things and showing how infrastructure changes can make a difference. You don't even need to call it infrastructure. Talking about fast broadband, people know what that means. Talking about better roads, I can tell you one of the biggest discussions in my part of the world is potholes. So, you know, you don't have to say infrastructure. What you need to say is we'll fix the potholes, and that'll make a huge difference to people. People get exercised by those things.
Well, they absolutely do. Susan, when you've got a board meeting agenda and the word infrastructure appears on it, does your heart leap, or do you think, oh God, let's move on to the next one? And if it's the latter case, that's got to be something that surely every big organisation addresses.
Yeah, I think so. And just picking up on Mary's point there, I think it's how you talk about these things, isn't it? I mean, we obviously talk to our customers about their priorities in our region for what we do. So we provide safe, clean drinking water, and, you know, we look after the environment. And in our region, looking after the third of the nation's bathing beaches, there's a real focus on making sure those bathing beaches are available for people to enjoy. So when you talk about it in that sense, that's what infrastructure is doing. It's allowing people to have the opportunity to have access to, you know, fantastic beaches and in this region, and to for all the tourism that relies on it, have that fresh, clean drinking water that we all rely on as well. So I think it's how you talk about these things. And I think the point about talking to customers and listening to them about their concerns and their priorities is really important part of what we do. And having that that relationship with customers, so that they feel connected to us as a business, is really important. We've launched our water share scheme that we've done more recently, where customers have joined us as a business and now shareholders in our business. And we have open quarterly meetings with them where they can ask us any question they would like to pose. They talk about what the priorities are in their area. The last meeting we had a couple of weeks ago was focusing on North Devon and looking at some of the really interesting projects we were doing there. and people were asking us about, opportunities to join us as a business and what our apprenticeship schemes were like, and whether they could join, as well as finding out some of the work that we were doing in and around their community and their region. So, I think for me, part of this levelling up is also big business to think about how big business actually interacts with their communities in a different way, to make people feel connected and to get people interested in what we're doing.
You've been with South West Water for 14 years, I think. Over that period, how have you noticed things changing in the way that the public interacts with you and their priorities, and how have your priorities changed in that time as a business?
Yeah, good question. So I think probably two things to say. We went through a period in the Southwest of getting ourselves with our treatment works and our infrastructure up to a standard where we could deliver what we needed to for the bathing beaches, and spent billions of pounds in terms of doing that. What we've seen in terms of priorities, and rightly so, is the environmental agenda really coming to the fore, and thinking of different ways that we can invest and work with perhaps other landowners to avoid perhaps those end of pipe pouring concrete schemes, and think about how we can work differently in catchments with other landowners to deliver schemes that will help us on our journey to reducing carbon and getting to a net zero position sooner rather than later. So I think there's a real shift in dynamic of not just what we're doing, but how we're achieving what we need to do, and also really thinking about the environment in a very different way, and challenging some of the things that have happened in the past, and thinking about how we can work differently, and just being really open and transparent with our customers, and allowing, like I said to you about these open quarterly public meetings that we have, just allowing people just to have access to us and just to talk to us and think about priorities that they have in their local communities that we can deliver on. So there's been a real shift, and certainly a real focus on the environment and how we can do more to improve the environment in our region.
Justine, the whole definition of infrastructure has changed so much over the years, hasn't it? If we were having this conversation in the 1930s in America, we would be talking about Roosevelt's New Deal, all of these huge investment in public projects, the Hoover Dam and all that sort of thing. And they would always be related to jobs for manual labor. Now, that's not the situation that we're in 2021, isn't it? Is it? You can't just sort of pump prime the economy by building new roads all over the place or building new railways. It just can't work like that. So how can we increase employment in the infrastructure area? I guess it is predominantly in the technological side.
Well, I think we are in a period where we are investing a huge amount in our national infrastructure, perhaps in a way that we haven't seen for 20 or 30 years. I don't think that's just started. It's been steadily ramping up really over the last probably 15 to 20 years in practice, and for lots of reasons. But in many respects, it's down to the fact that the Victorians did an amazing job of building Britain's infrastructure, but eventually there was a need to refresh it and to make sure it had the capacity for the next 100 and odd years. So there is a lot of infrastructure projects that are underway. I think you've hit the nail on the head, though. It's about making sure they're not just done for the sake of it. And I think it's always a risk. And we saw this in, maybe France is a good example, where there's a preponderance of high-speed rail. Not so much of it is necessarily all used. Having said that, it will have created a huge amount of work at the time. So the key is making sure the investments are smart ones, not just in terms of jobs for the short term and medium term, but in terms of what they can do for the economy.
That's a problem, though,
isn't it? The longer term.
That's a problem, because governments don't have a great record in picking winners.
And indeed, in the sense that there needs to be a long-term strategy on infrastructure. And obviously, often politics is so focused on the short term. I think it was interesting that last year you saw the Treasury revisit its rule book, which is called the Green Book, to really take this smarter approach on how it looks at investing in infrastructure for the long term. And there are lots of financial approaches that some people listening in and watching this seminar will be familiar with, called net present value, where you discount things back that are going to happen in the future and work out how much they're worth today. And then you can work out whether it's worth spending the money to achieve them. But actually, for really long-term infrastructure investments, like the ones often that Susan's looking at, or in transport in particular, you know, we're still reaping the benefits of money spent by the Victorians today on our classic transport network. So it's not easy. And I'm afraid sometimes, yeah, you are in a government and you just have to make a call on what you think a strategy is, because you can't quantify absolutely everything. But I think for the most part, we can have a sense that connecting up key areas and making sure that people are connected up is at the heart of how you're going to deliver levelling up. Post-COVID, of course, there's got to be a growing focus. We already knew this on digital, and actually COVID gives us a chance to perhaps put more opportunities on the doorstep virtually that would have been really much harder to do practically pre-COVID. So we should grab that opportunity and make sure we don't lose it. There'll be some people in both Mary and Susan's regions that will be able to do work now, and perhaps working remotely 3 days a week, just 2 days in the office, that's affordable and practical in a way that simply wouldn't have been possible before. And I think it's not losing sight of those sorts of opportunities now that is absolutely key if we're going to make the most of what really does feel like a change moment after COVID.
Mary, one of the things that we've talked about in previous seminars relating to other subjects is the relationship between universities and business. Just take us through how that works with you, and how you think that relationship can actually impact what happens in future on local infrastructure.
Thank you, Ian. Yes, it's a really good question, and very, very important.
You keep telling me I'm asking good questions. I'm doing my
well,
job.
There you go. I mean, obviously you're a deep professional and know what you're doing. The point is that universities have changed and are much more focused now on working in their communities and with their businesses. We were established by the city mothers and fathers, actually. So we didn't have government funding in the first instance. So we have a deep commitment to our communities and to the business community. So we are a Siemens Principal Partner University, one of 15 in the country, including Manchester, Cambridge and Newcastle, and ourselves, Lincoln. And Siemens actually was going to vacate its factory in Lincoln because they couldn't find graduates. So I said to the MD of the Lincoln site, well, why don't we start an engineering school together? Which is exactly what we did. And Siemens now co-locates with us on our campus. It has its global industrial turbine training center on the campus, and it's now opened up a second factory in Lincoln. Our graduates get experience, they get work experience, paid work experience in the summer. With Siemens, and Siemens describe it as a wonderful 3-year or 4-year interview, because they see them every year and they see how they develop, and then they pick the ones they want. And they have had 95% retention of those engineering graduates.
That's incredible.
In the business. It is incredible. It's absolutely incredible. And that 5% is actually people going into other parts of Siemens.
But I think this is absolutely fascinating, because I mean, you sort of rather blithely said, well, they said they were going to close the factory. So I said, well, let's start an engineering school. So we did. I mean, it sounds very simple, but I suspect that required an attitude from you as the Vice Chancellor rather different to maybe if this had happened 20 or 30 years ago. I'm not sure that suggestion would have even been made. I mean, how long did it take to get off the ground?
We started conversations in 2009, and our first students joined us in 2011. So 2 years.
That's amazing.
It was phenomenal, but it was as much about Siemens' attitude. And of course, as a German company at heart, they get the role of education very clearly. But that was the first of those that we did. We started a pharmacy school in partnership with our local community pharmacists, the Cooperative Society. And did exactly the same kind of thing because they couldn't get graduates. So we worked in partnership with them. They also are big landowners, and we transformed a derelict old building into a school of pharmacy with them. And that is how we work with our employers. We work with them on the design of the curriculum, the delivery of the curriculum, and our students get to experience real world work. And that makes a huge difference. I mentioned our campus that is nearly 2 hours away from our main campus. That is a food campus because it sits in the heart of the place where your Brussels sprouts, your pizza, your whatever will have come from. Lincolnshire is the home of food. And so we work with all the food companies there. We have spoken to them about what they want. Some of them don't want regular degrees. They want degree apprenticeships. So we do degree apprenticeships. Our schools do level 2 and level 3. Businesses don't care about levels or anything like that. What they want is the right kind of education for their workforce. And that is the approach that we take at Lincoln. And that is how we're trying to level up.
And Susan, do you find that your local universities, educational establishments are as forward-thinking as Mary and actually willing to get involved in the kind of partnerships that she's talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it sounds fantastic, the work that Mary and the team are doing, but certainly in our region, we have very strong links with our local universities, whether that's Exeter, whether that's Plymouth, and we are working very closely with Exeter on developing and putting quite a lot of investment into it, a international environmental innovation centre that's launching in Exeter. So I think a relationship that we have with universities now is probably very different. You asked me what's changed over the 14 or so years since I've been working here. I mean, certainly how we work with the universities and indeed the colleges in our region is very different, very open, very collaborative, making sure that there are opportunities for ourselves as a business to really tap into the innovation that you see in universities in a very different way.
Do you think that it might be a good idea for all government departments? This is addressed to all three of you, but let's start with you, Susan. Do you think it might be an idea for all government departments to actually overtly say to all public sector institutions, whether it's universities, hospitals, whatever, you need to have a levelling up plan for your institution and be able to cooperate with people in local areas? Because I think that would really get things motoring, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think absolutely, and I think collaboration is at the heart of this, and working together as communities is going to be key. Coming on the back of what we've just all been through for the last 12 months. I can't say more strongly than that, but certainly working together in communities, in collaboration, is going to deliver us the economic growth that we need coming through this.
What do you think to that idea, Mary?
I think it's a really brilliant idea, and I think the thing I find really exciting about the levelling up goals is that it's a framework which goes beyond what we're currently asked to do, which is an access and participation plan, which is not as wide-reaching. And in fact, I have started using the levelling up goals because we do some work around procurement and the companies that apply the tender for work, but the levelling up goals are really excellent to use for that area. And I think expecting people to have levelling up plans would get things motoring, as you say.
Justine, as a former Conservative cabinet minister, there would no doubt be some people on the right who would say that this is too much government interference. The market will sort this out. But do you think it is time for government to be slightly more prescriptive on this and actually say to institutions effectively under their control, to one extent or another, this is what we want you to do?
Yes, of course. And I think it's not about being prescriptive, it's about being smart. If you're going to level up, you need to get a grip on what is a really complex policy agenda that's got lots of different parts of it that you need everything to address if you're really going to be successful. That's why we pull together the Levelling Up goals, because it does actually break down this complicated problem into some 14 digestible parts. And as Mary says, whether you're a university or whether you're Pennon Group with South West Water and Susan, it means you can then start to say, well, where do we really fit in here? In a way that means two organizations that are completely different can start to say, well, these are our crossovers and these are the areas that we're working on that you're not. And then there is, of course, civil society, very involved across the piece. And we've now got NHS trusts who are using the Levelling Up goals. We've got some government departments anyway using them, like the Ministry of Justice and HMRC. They're just using them as a framework because they genuinely do help them sift through often what they're already doing,
and
understand the gaps and work out what's next.
Sorry to interrupt. Presumably that enables them to measure progress as well, which is vitally important, because we can all come out with lovely words, but you need to actually measure that there has been some progress.
Indeed. And if you think about its planet and people, a lot of businesses and organizations will have their planet strategy. And we, in a sense, we know what the measurable is because it's getting to net zero. So there's something very, very clear cut about where we have to get to. I think when it comes to levelling up and people measurements, a lot harder. So what we're now doing is working through all of those measurements that need to be attached to each of those individual levelling up goals. It's surprising in a sense there are some gaps there that maybe start to give you a sense of, well, if we're not measuring certain key parts of levelling up, maybe that's why we found it harder to do in the past. But if you have a plan and then you're clear cut about how you're going to measure progress at that stage, you are right, Ian. The more of those plans that are in place, the more transparent it is, then the easier it is for us to genuinely say, are we moving in the right direction? And who's doing what, and is everyone really making the contribution that we think we can?
Well, I think some really positive things have come out of this session this afternoon. It shows what you can do with a smaller panel sometimes. Small but perfectly formed. It's been great to chair this discussion, and thank you all for joining us. Justine, Susan and Mary from the University of Lincoln, and of course Penn and South West Water. There are lots of these seminars on the Levelling Up website if you want to listen to or watch others, and we have several more lined up over the coming weeks. So do join us again. Goodbye.